we'll go ahead and call to order and declare a quorum of 6 members present for the workshop. And we'll start with C1 consideration, for 7 members present. That's right. Consideration, discussion, of possible action related to the, and this is important, so I'm glad everybody's here. Not that other things are not important, just to clarify. But this is Mr. Wesson and Mr. Harris's favorite, Dr. Wesson and Mr. Harris's favorite. Action related to the 2017-18 school calendar development process. Dr. Ely.
Thank you, Dr. Yokin. Without any other lead up, I'm just going to throw it to Greg McIntyre, Deputy Superintendent of Curriculum Instruction. Greg.
Thank you, Dr. Ely. I'm back to talk about the school calendar development process. Last time we talked, we took a look at a couple of calendars that were very, very similar. And you might recall that both of those calendars met one of the board parameters where we have finals finish by the end of the first semester. And then secondly, that the school year would finish that last Friday in May. Since that time, we were visited with DEIC and others and received feedback about the length of the Christmas or winter break on those first two calendars. You might recall that on the other two calendars, students would have been returning January 4th from the break. And so they would have been going to school on January 4th and 5th. And so lots of the feedback that we got was, can we develop a calendar where we have January 4th and 5th off? And is it possible that we could have graduation at Reed Arena that next weekend on June 1st? So the blue calendar that you have before you reflects both of those things. You can see where the first semester is exactly the same as one of the calendars we looked at last time, the green calendar, but it's the second semester that's a little different. On this one, it has January 4th as a holiday and January 5th as what we call a comp day. So our teachers who have accrued at least 6 hours of professional development would have that day off as well, which is actually pretty easy for most people to do, to be quite honest with you. So that completes that Christmas or winter break. Because we had 2 days of attendance there, we had to find a place for them to go. So we looked at the week right after Memorial Day. And so May 29th and 30th are where those 2 days from January 4th and 5th moved down to May 29th and 30th. And we made May 31st an early release day. What that does is that for middle school and high school final exam schedules, it's much easier to go ahead and administer those final exams in 2.5 days, May 29th, 30th, and 31st, rather than just 2 days. That makes it just a little bit too tight. So on this calendar, May 31st would be an early release day, and June 1st is when we would have graduation at Reed Arena. The feedback I'm looking for before we talk with DEIC tomorrow is that is this calendar one that we would want DEIC to consider along with the calendars that we looked at last time, because it does move graduation from May 25th to June 1st.
Thank you. Any comments?
I have one. It doesn't relate to gestation.
Thank you.
And it really, I mean, I like this, and I see the appeal and why you're bringing this one to us. It really does, to me, add a lot of benefit to the students and the teachers in trying to get their work done. The only thing that I want to make sure of is that you have fully vetted the use of facilities in the community so that we are not stepping on the toes of our other community members, i.e. the use of Reed for graduation.
We have as much as we possibly could have. I've worked with both Tiffany Parkerson and Gwen Elder and Reed Arena on this. Of course, at this early time, Reed will pencil us in, so it is available. They won't necessarily take a reservation per se at this point, but in all of our conversations, Gwen, Tiffany, myself, it is available at this time.
And Brian typically uses it on Saturday?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay.
One of the things that I talked to, or I think I sent an email to Dr. Eagley about, was the District of Innovation. And I don't know how familiar you are with that, but somebody had sent me a video clip of Forney ISD. And then I noticed, I think, was it today's paper that Navasota was, ISD was, and I guess what I'm asking for is the reason that some of these districts are doing that, is it because of the start date back in August, or is it seems like on that they can start school earlier, so there's a exception to the rule?
Really? Okay, I'll be happy to. Yes, I've seen the Forney ISD video. It's outstanding. It makes a lot of good points, and I like the approach that they use in explaining their process and their rationale behind that. With the District of Innovation, in order for a district to apply, there has to be some type of an innovative initiative for which state regulations need to be wavered, if you will, in order for that innovation, that innovative practice to be tried out. So far as the school calendar, that can be really a byproduct of being deemed a district of innovation. I'll give you an example. At Tasby, I attended a session where superintendent was talking about their district of innovation application. At one of their high schools, they had an auto shop program, and they were having great difficulty finding a diesel mechanic and a certified teacher who's also a diesel mechanic. However, like right across the street from the high school, they had a diesel mechanics shop business that was operating, and that person was willing to teach the kids, but he was not a certified teacher. In order for them to have people like this certified diesel mechanic instruct their kids, they applied to be a district of innovation for this innovative practice. They also, as a byproduct of that, went ahead and asked that the school calendar be changed. That's to say that you can't apply to be a district of innovation for the sole purpose of changing the calendar. There has to be another innovation for which state regulations are preventing you from being able to do that. So they had to have a waiver for teacher certification, in this case, for this diesel mechanic to work with their kids. So the window for District of Innovation for the upcoming school year has already passed. Even if we wanted to apply for it for this upcoming school year, we would be too late. For the next school year, assuming they open that window again, we could apply, assuming we have a district initiative where we need some of the state regulations wavered.
And it's a long process. Would get a exploratory committee to come up with policies that would be brought to the board. The board would have to act on that. It would have 30 days of rulemaking authority where they would receive feedback from those plans, and then the board would have to take action again. So it is kind of a longer process. When we were approached with the opportunity to become a district of innovation, we looked at a number of things that we're doing that we think are innovative. Our community-based accountability system, the choice that we provide through a number of our programs and facilities. And some of the things that we are doing right now, we didn't at the time feel that we needed a DOI or District of Innovation status to be able to do some of the things that we wanted to do. So we did not move forward with progressing through that. Some of the other things that are a part of that are some districts are looking to get some relief from teacher contracts and administrator contracts or class size requirements, and we didn't feel like that was something that we wanted to do either. So that's why we never went forward with it at this time. If this is something that we need to look at and determine if there's something that's innovative that we want to be doing, that there is state requirements, state laws that are standing within our way, then perhaps we can start looking at that, not for the next year, but for the year after.
I think my rationale was more as I heard more about it in the last 2-3 weeks, and it seemed like it all went back down to when the school started. So that's the only reason I was asking it.
I was going to say there was a lot out there about it, and to me, I wish that the legislators would look at that, and that 5 days really seemed to make a lot of people happy. And it's unfortunate that they can't, I mean, we're doing our business and we shouldn't have to go through this long process to get 5 days that would make a huge difference to most of the districts in the state of Texas. And I continue to not understand why 5 days they can't do without us having to be District of Innovation.
You'll see that addressed at our 7 o'clock meeting in our legislative priorities.
Well, that being said, I think on the work that you've done on the blue calendar really addresses a lot of the concerns that we perhaps had voiced last month. And personally, if you were asking for an indication which one I liked better, I think the blue meets that criteria, particularly if Rita Arena is available. And I don't know how the others might feel.
I agree.
I like it. I just wonder if the extracurricular activity, like sometimes you get into those summer camps and stuff, and I know it probably only affects a few, but it could affect more than we realize. I don't know. Maybe that's something you can figure out in DEIC.
There may be one out there that's going to be affected, I'm sure. I don't know that we can avoid all of them. What I'd like to do, and it sounds like you're comfortable with this blue calendar, is to be able to present it to DEIC tomorrow. And then from there, have DEIC narrow our options to just 2 calendars to where then we can post them online to get
Perhaps
some percentage if they don't want to make that.
perhaps you might consider having DEIC narrow it to
one.
one choice. That makes the best sense, given that this fulfills all the obligations and the issues that people have had in the past with our calendars that we know are already problematic with the first one that was submitted. So it's worth having them vote whether they think it's worthwhile sending it out for a vote, and if not, then make a recommendation.
Okay, sounds great. Thank you.
And I'm assuming that everybody else feels that way. If not, then speak your piece.
Thank you. I
Shoot
appreciate
you
it.
now, or
I just have one question, and I realize the fall and the spring, there's always an inequity there with number of days. And it seems like the second 6 weeks is always a little bit shorter, closer to 5. And I'm just looking at the third 6 weeks now, where that's the one that's 5 weeks, but one of those weeks is Thanksgiving and the other one's finals. I mean, are we going to run into an instruction problem with getting major?
We will seek the feedback from
Okay.
from DEIC tomorrow.
Okay.
For the teachers that are on that committee. We've struggled with that very question every year, and in years past, sometimes we've tried ending a 6 weeks, like midweek, like a Tuesday or a Wednesday. It doesn't usually last very long. It's usually easier to end it on a Friday, have the weekend to prepare for the next 6 weeks. But we will ask that question tomorrow. Thank you.
thank you. We'll move on to C2, consideration, discussion of possible action related to CSISD board operating procedures. This is something that we traditionally do in December, and one of the things that I thought perhaps might behoove us is to think about the operating procedures as far as community input. And that was one of the things that I asked the administration to look at. So, I was just explaining what, where our focus was going to be.
And for whatever reason, I forgot this does not have page numbers on it. So if you'll go to the section on communications, and the second page in constituent conduct during board meetings, and then the next section talks about, near the end of that section, it talks about public hearings. So didn't know if we wanted to revisit some of the policies that we have, practices that we have in this district in regards to either public comment during a board meeting or public hearings. And so what you'll see there, as you go through constituent conduct during board meetings, everybody on that spot, you can see that we do provide a spot for addressing the board on agenda and non-agenda items. We provide for 3 minutes of time for a regular board meeting. That is something that as a governmental entity, the public needs the opportunity to be able to present their grievances, redress issues to the board. So that we will need a time for that on the for our regular board meetings. We have always done 3 minutes, or I say always, at least the past 20 years we've done 3 minutes. Seems to be fairly standard. And then things that we have, each speaker is limited to one opportunity at the microphone. Unused minutes may not be accrued, are pretty standard. Some districts go to the lengths of limiting time by, say, we only have 30 minutes for public comment during a particular board meeting because we've got to go on and do our business. We ostensibly limit that time in the sense that only 5 people can speak on a given subject. So if at a regular board meeting, 30 people decided to speak on whatever the subject was, only the first 5 cards would be allowed to speak based on our current board policy here. So that does somewhat limit that opportunity during the meetings. Now, when we go to public hearings, which are for the express purpose of gathering feedback from the public, you get 4 minutes, and we go till anybody can speak at those. So, let's see, what else do we need? Signing cards. The board is not allowed derogatory comments or signs or placards. Audience shall refrain from talking or applause during the comments. And then those are the opening comments that are spoken each time that we go into a public comment at a regular board meeting. So that's pretty much it for a regular board meeting. For public hearings, the only difference is, and I kind of alluded to that already, is that speakers get 4 minutes rather than 3, and they're not limited in the number of people who can speak on an issue.
Feedback on what we experienced as far as public forums. Do you feel comfortable with these as the guidelines, or is there something that perhaps might behoove us to modify?
I think it's personal opinion. It might be worth saying when we have multiple public hearings that are designed to collect feedback on the same topic, that individuals may not speak at more than one of those public hearings to voice their opinion, assuming that all those public hearings are designed to collect an opinion on the same thing. So, for instance, what we experienced earlier this fall was hearing from the same people 3 times before in 3 different public forums, even though nothing had transpired in between when those public forums occurred. So I think the goal of having multiple times in those forums is to be able to give everybody the opportunity to speak, not to give everybody the opportunity to speak 3 times.
Well, and one of the things that I think is maybe we might need to take into consideration is, obviously when these kinds of guidelines were put together, social media was not quite what it is now, and we get email. I mean, it used to be the only way you could gather information was through actually coming to the meeting, and now with the amount of email we get, we seem to, in this last situation, we not only heard from some of the same individuals multiple times, but we got multiple emails from them, and though that there is that right, obviously, it made it very difficult to then take into account others' opinions, because there's just a minimal amount of time that you can spend reading everything.
Before we go too far down this road, we did ask this question of our policy council at Texas Association of School Boards, and we asked that very question. Can you say, we're having 3 public forums, speak at one of the 3, whichever one you choose to, and the answer that we received back from our consultants was no. That folks do, if we're having a public forum, then they have the opportunity to speak at each of the public forums. Now, we can restrict their right to yield minutes or accrue minutes or, those types of things, but the opportunity to speak still should be afforded if we're having a public hearing.
Okay, let me ask of your policy council. You mentioned that we need to give people an opportunity to provide feedback at our regular meeting. Let's dive into that a little bit. As someone who likes to get information, look at it, digest it, so that I can kind of wrap my thinking around it and see how it has implications for other areas of things we do. I like to have the information and the feedback ahead of time. One thing I think we should talk about is when we have a series of public hearings, would it be, well, one, is it even possible, but would it be a good idea to say the time to speak on this is at these designated hearings, not at the regular meeting, so that we can get the information ahead of time, digest it, hear people's thoughts, hear their concerns, see how it plays out, as opposed to getting it, quite frankly, at the 11th hour, right when we're having to make a decision. To me, if there's some option to do that, I would like to explore it. The other thing is, I think it would allow us as a group to, well, quite frankly, not get as tired when we're trying to grapple with these issues. I mean, I don't know about y'all, but that was a little bit draining and difficult. So that if when we're actually designated to sit down and work through the issue as a group, if it wouldn't make sense to have that be the focus and have the time for public input to be at all these series of hearings. Is it possible?
So I think we'd have to look, I don't think we could say we're having public comment on anything in the world except this. But we could look at how we style our meetings. For example, if we had a special workshop that did not have a time for public comment on there, and that was designed for the board to work through and process the feedback that they had received through email and the previous forums, I think we could probably have a work session to work through that. But we will ask the question as you have asked it of us.
Amy Kavlicek, our consultant, said that if you were having a board meeting and you were having public comment and it went longer than you wanted it to go, the board president could say, we're going to stop the public comment at this point and set aside, pick a date for another public hearing then, so that you could separate that out.
So that's an option. I don't know that we
Yeah.
do what we want to do.
No, it does, and it seems to me if that's an option, let's just say at the regular meeting at 7 o'clock tonight, is there a requirement that we have public hearing on? There is a legal requirement that we allow it? Okay, and we can just cap the time. What if we cap it at 2 minutes, 27 seconds?
You can cap the time. Right now it's capped we don't cap it right now. SASB recommends, if you want to cap the time like 30 minutes.
Okay.
So at a regular board meeting, how time is parsed out is if a bunch of people want to come up and talk about rezoning, only 5 people could speak, and they could only speak at a grand total of 15 minutes. So
I got you.
how that's.
So it sounds like to me, one of the better option might be, if we're going to have something that's big as a singular issue, to pull it out of the regular meeting, have your series of hearings, and then have a workshop session without public comment where we do our thing, if there's interest in the group to do that.
Certainly. And I guess I just want to kind of pause real quick. I think everybody in this room is for public comment and public input in this process. What we're trying to do is come up with a way to really manage and have the board be able to process effectively and make good decisions based on all of the feedback that's coming in. So we have some things already in policy that help manage that, and that's 5 speakers per one topic at a regular meeting, and the opportunity to go and have a public hearing for 4 minutes at a time and let everybody have the opportunity to speak. Now, as we go through specific instances like boundary adjustment as we move on in the future, I think it's maybe a further discussion for the board to talk about how many opportunities there are, how many different public forums we would have on those particular instances. Do we have to have 3? Do we have 2? Do we have 1? How does that work in the light of electronic communications? One of the areas I think that has come up, changing gears just a little bit, is taking public input through email and having the district provide each board member with a CSISD email. to make that an ease of gathering feedback. I think that's something that we don't need any policy change for. Perhaps we can put that in our board operating procedures, and we can make that happen pretty quickly as a way to help manage the flow of information as well.
One of the things I think that would do for us as well is ensure that everybody is comfortable with where they're receiving the information, because I know right now some people are getting it at work. If it ever got to a point where we had to have an open records request, it does become a little contentious if you're getting some of this stuff at work. And so I think that it would behoove us all to perhaps have that CSISD email and also make it clear that that is the way that the board is going to accept information, because I think then it becomes clear what is conversations with your Sunday school friends versus, what is official input that you're getting for utilization and making decisions at school board meetings.
I think it's just clear that we all got frustrated in those public hearings, hearing from the same people over and over again. So perhaps if we can't legally restrict that, perhaps we can add a statement somewhere at the beginning of those meetings that in order to manage time effectively, our preference would be that you only speak at one of our public hearings, even though we would fully well know that we can't enforce that and people can, but just for the sake of, we were not the only ones. There were a lot of other people in that room that were sick of didn't enjoy as much hearing from the same people 3 or 4 separate times. And especially when they essentially kind of said the same thing over and over again. So I think those meetings would have been more effective, and it's easier for us to listen when we're hearing from new people who are either presenting information in a new way or presenting different opinions, whatever that is.
So is there also perhaps a need to have a time on which we've gotten the cards? One of the things that we suffered from a little bit was that people were just adding cards at the end and saying, yeah, I agree with what he said, or I agree with, and I know we do value public comment. A concern that I do have, though, is the silent majority can get intimidated by all of that going on, and perhaps there was others that came that didn't ever feel comfortable coming up and giving us their input, because we did hear from a lot of the same people, and I do feel like we had a very good handle on what their concerns were. But did that have a negative impact on others who perhaps might wanted to share their own viewpoint on what they saw with what we were trying to do?
That's hard to know. Certainly those folks would have had the opportunity to share electronic feedback to feedback@csisd.org or individually to board members, and so they certainly would have had that. I think what was different about this boundary adjustment process than we had in the past is what we have right now, which is the videos of the meeting. So in the past, you had to come to a meeting and listen to what was said or talk to somebody who went to the meeting, but now you can, in the comfort of your home at any time of the day, watch what was said. And so I think that had some ramifications on this last process that we went through.
Yeah, because we're not required to have, a certain number of meetings, public comment.
No, that's certainly.
I do want to hear from the public. I certainly want to hear that. The struggle that I had, not only because people spoke over and over again, but they spoke over and over again about some things that just, quite frankly, weren't right. They were giving out information that was not correct information. And we talk about we don't take derogatory comment. However, I'm sure there's some that on that committee that felt like there was some derogatory comment posed to them, as well as the board too, although I feel like, we're elected to be here. Those people we're volunteering, but they're volunteering in a different way. So there's a part of me that says, you know, since we have so many opportunities for people to get in touch with us, that you could have one meeting of public comment. The other thing that I struggle with is that how do we get back the information other than at a meeting when we're discussing it? And I think we get bombarded. There's some things that we know that sometimes we get information, like we'll ask for clarification about some things, or or things that we just know that we know from being here all the time about right information. That's part of the thing. I don't know how we fix that for this. But can you respond as superintendent? We cannot respond in Open Meetings Act, but could you respond as the superintendent or one of your designees, respond to information at some point that just clearly is incorrect?
Okay, so there's a couple things here. So let's go back to a regular board meeting for a non-agenda item.
Okay.
If it was a non-agenda item, we couldn't respond because it was not given 72 hours notice to the public that we were going to be discussing this issue. So either you or the administration. So let's say another instance would be a public hearing around something like boundary adjustment, and there's some information out there that is not correct. Can the administration, let's say, kind of set the record straight of give the factual information? The answer is yes, but we were cautioned by TASB, and I agree with them about doing that. If the hearing is for gathering information and listening, it should probably be for listening. If the administration responds to one and then somebody else comes in and then the administration responds to another, then it can get into a more of a dialogue, and it's not designed to be a dialogue. It's designed to be hearing public comments and concerns in regards to that issue. So to do that, I think we should tread into that very lightly.
I understand that, but there's got to be some way where and maybe we could be a district of innovation. I don't know. But there's got to be some way that quickly we can respond, and maybe not in that meeting, but that we can quickly respond to gross bad information.
Well, maybe one of the things we need to think about is the timing aspect of it, and maybe we don't do all three feedback meetings before we do a meeting, as Mr. Harris pointed out. So, and I'm just thinking out loud, but so we have the first one, and we already have it on our schedule that we're going to have a meeting to discuss information that we heard in the first public forum, and there is no public comment on that. But that maybe we then, so Monday night we hear what they had to say, and on Wednesday night, because then we've had that 48 hours to kind of think about it, maybe then on that Wednesday night we get together and discuss to maybe minimize some of the concerns or to really discuss, because I think what happens when we don't respond, if it is erroneous, it takes a life of its own, and if we don't have if we haven't publicly expressed our opinion, then people decide they know what your opinion is based on whether you wear a blue shirt or a green shirt or the way you speak, or they fill in the blanks, and so perhaps we need to think about the order in which we do it to help mitigate the angst in the community.
Well, the perfect example of that for the committee as well. See, what the committee got is in there too, because we were going to allow the committee to meet again and come back to us with a recommendation. The one thing that was clear is I think early on we all felt very, very good about allowing the ninth graders, and yet that was angst for those people for a long time, and it became clear to me that we were all sitting around going, yeah, that makes sense. And we don't even have an opportunity, and it has to go through three meetings, and those people have angst each of those meetings for something that we all were, if we'd have had a meeting afterwards, we clearly would have said, well, that makes sense. I mean, we didn't, the committee thought this was the right thing. It turns out that we didn't feel that way. We didn't have that opinion. They even changed their opinion about it once they heard it out loud, which is why you have public comment, because somebody brings to your attention something maybe you've missed while you're looking at all the details. So that could have saved that one issue could have saved a whole bunch of public comment later on. In fact, I mean, it would have, I still think about the last one in here, and the guy goes, I didn't think it was a big deal, but I went home, and yes, it clearly was a big deal.
Well, I think that goes back to what Dr. Yokin said about process. You're right. If we had had a gathering pretty early in that process, I think that issue would have gone away, and I give you credit for pushing us to that pretty early in our process to
Well, I think,
relieve
but
some of that.
I think part of our issue, I mean, I'm just trying to think how we would have rectified that this past go-round, and part of the problem is nothing had been officially presented to us at that point, right? I mean, this is all something that committee was still struggling with and making a recommendation on. So for us as a board to come out after the first of those 3 meetings and say, here's our opinion, really kind of undercuts that committee that got put together to make that recommendation. I mean, the truth is we wanted the community's input on what all of that looked like. And I think if we had held that first feedback session and then the board would have come out and said, yes, you know, grandfathering the ninth graders is a great idea, then what is that committee going to do when they turn around and meet on that exact same issue after 2 more public hearings? So, I mean, I'm just trying to, I'm practically trying to think, and that's part of the problem is when we sent that out to that committee, the whole process is that committee's responsibility until they come back with a firm recommendation. So,
Well, in that case, I guess the committee should have met after that first feedback session.
Could I offer an observation?
please.
So board operating procedures govern how we proceed, how we operate as a board, and we're really looking at things like, is 3 minutes enough or 4 minutes, and those types of things. It seems like our discussion now is really around the boundary adjustment process. Okay. And it seems like that it behooves us to have a conversation on that. I think we are planning on having a conversation after the first of the year in regards to board policy, in regards to boundary adjustment. Perhaps those types of conversations are best around that particular concept. And this is more kind of big picture, how we do all sorts of public hearings.
So based on that input, one of the bullets might be to add that the board needs to evaluate the timing of, specific meetings in relationship to public forums. Just, if we all get hit by a truck tomorrow and you have to start over with 7 people, I think there needs to be something written down so it's clear, oh gosh, this is something you need to think about on what the timing. So I would like to see, and perhaps you can get some guidance from your consultant, but with the intent that the board needs to be aware that there needs to be some thought process between public hearings and actual meetings to ensure that the public hearing information is properly utilized or something. I mean, I don't know what the words are, but just a thought point so that in the future people will go, well, why were they saying that? And it's just because you don't want to get so far down with the public hearing information that, as Ms. Barrett points out, the erroneous stuff is just taking a life of its own.
Well, yeah, I think there are a couple of things that I want to talk about briefly. One is it's easy for us to talk about that because we have a concrete example right now. But what's to say that when you get together, you don't start delving into the meat of the issue when you haven't actually gotten the public feedback that you said you were going to get? So, I mean, that's not as easy to do in practice, I think. And then one of the other things I want to point out is I really enjoyed what Chuck did in terms of getting out the information to not only to all of you, but to the public. Like when I request something, that he provides the information to me and to all of you and to the public so they see what we're seeing. Because I got some good feedback that was quite detailed about some of that. They said, okay, turn to page 7 of chart X and walk through their particular issue. And I found that to be tremendously helpful. And to me, it's interesting, we're having this discussion, and when at the national level we're talking about fake news, because in essence that's what you're talking about. Is this story would come up, and I mean, we had it before we even got started. You'll recall spring, over a year ago, there was a story that went around that we had already decided something that, I mean, when I heard it, I just laughed and said, well, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Yet hundreds of people thought that way and thought that that was in fact true. So I think the way you combat that is with a steady stream of where the process is, here are the pieces of information, these are the projections, these are the options that have been asked for, or, you know, it's not just that issue, but whatever issue we're grappling with. Giving the real information on the website is the best way I know. If it's appropriate, Chuck can issue a press release or whatever, but I think the way you combat the fake story is an official communication with the real story, or if nothing's been decided, I mean, you can flat out say nothing has been decided. Okay, now as to the particular adjustment of the procedures, you know, the last thing I would want to do in an effort to deal with a complex or big or singular type issue like boundary adjustment is to prevent public comment on some other agenda item. So if it's an all or nothing kind of thing and it sounds like we can't do nothing, I wouldn't want to do nothing, quite frankly, in terms of limiting public feedback on a regular board meeting agenda. What that tells me is I don't need to adjust that on the procedures, but I may want to look at how I handle the board procedure for dealing with these one-off issues that are, I'll use the term big, I mean, you all know what I mean, that is separate and apart from the day-to-day business that we're really here for anyway. And I don't know if it's in some way related to the public hearings or if we just maybe put another bullet point or something to address the option of holding a special workshop to address the issues for which we have had public hearings. Because, I mean, to me one thing that's absolutely critical, I want to give the public a chance to provide feedback on decisions we are going to make, both before and after. And I think as many avenues that we can have, the better. Now, we clearly have some details to deal with about how it's done so we don't create logistics problems for the district or legal problems for anyone. But I do think we can explore that because I like the idea. I can tell you, for me personally, the ability to come to a meeting where I know it's going to be dialogue with us, sitting down, digging through these hard issues, and knowing that's the focus would be helpful, as opposed to we may get some new piece of information that all of a sudden, well, I'm not sure how that fits in, and not have time to think about it, yet be expected to digest and make a decision. I mean, so it's to me, it's a way to give greater emphasis and greater weight on the actual feedback that we get, so that we can then focus on it without who's going to get the last word, so that's what's weighing in the district's mind, or some dynamic like that. Anyway, that's kind of where I'm thinking. So I don't think we need to change regular meeting procedures for that.
Did you get that?
So you're
I
kind
told you there were a lot of points.
So you're almost going with what we would call a chunk and chew mentality. Get a chunk of information, chew on it a little bit, get another chunk, chew on it a little bit, and be able to process through that. We really do say that, actually. So
Yeah,
Those are educational terms.
so it's technical. I'm sorry to be so technical today.
yeah. I mean, in essence, yes.
Yeah, something, but, you know, having to do with the public hearings, I think we we're probably okay in our regular meetings, but with the public hearings, making it is beneficial to all. You know, I mean, that's what our goal is. It's not to limit what people are saying, but it is a case where you don't want people hanging out there with poor information for a long length of time. You don't want people feeling the need to say the same thing over and over. We haven't had an opportunity to respond, because in some instances, perhaps if we modify our procedure and we're able to respond before the third or fourth public hearing, then we don't hear from them again, because then they actually understand what our feedback is. But that chunk and chew board policy perhaps is something we need to look at.
And I don't know if you put it in the procedures, but to put, like, what I heard him say too is to have that like, it's Chuck now, but it'd be somebody else later, that do you have to put that in the policy that any kind of,
Not for a long time.
yeah, he's quick, isn't he? All right, but that, do we have to put that in the policies here, that we would have information out?
I need a little bit of time to
Think about that?
chew
Okay, you chew on that.
some of what we've talked about and kind of see if it belongs in our board operating procedures, or perhaps in updated board policy, or whether it's maybe in something like rezoning policy, boundary adjustment, or something like that.
Well,
So
you can just still have those, excuse me, but you could still have some things like, I appreciate what you said about if something were to go terribly wrong, that you would have, you hate to leave and not give the next group something to learn from, and it doesn't have to necessarily be policy, but things to think about. And I don't know if that fits somewhere in a different section but things that you might consider as you're planning. And maybe that's something we look at again, like in January or something, where we're looking at all these things at our training, but that we have places where we give the next group something to, because otherwise it goes away and then you forget.
Right, well, I think that perhaps Chrissy's been taking great notes, I know, so I'm sure after they've chewed or chunked or whatever they're gonna do, or checked, then they'll come back to us with some more guidance. Would that be correct?
Yes, we can bring this back. I anticipate us, again, it's at the board's pleasure, but perhaps having a first look at perhaps a boundary adjustment policy, maybe at the January board meeting, because we've got elementary boundary adjustment coming up soon. We're going to need to start getting prepared for that process coming up.
Okay, great, thank you. Anything else? Okay, we'll move on to C3, consideration, discussion of possible action related to the Series 2017 bond sale and finance options. I don't know how they're going to follow a chunk and chew and
Chunk and chew, chew and chew.
I needed another bound thing.
All right, that's all right. I'm regretting that.
Yeah, we're gonna have fun with that.
Dr. Yoka, members of the board, it's my pleasure to welcome to the dais Victor Quiroga from Frost Bank, who's here to talk about the sale of the second half of the bond project from November of 2015. The finance options. This is an action item on tonight's agenda. We have an opportunity to speak with Victor about have him do a little presentation, ask any questions that y'all may have. We also have Jeff Gulbis from Parkhurst McCall, one of those is right, here as our bond counsel to be able to answer questions as well. So,
Honorable President, members of the board, Dr. Ely, thank you for having me here this evening. We wanted to share with you some information regarding what's happened in the bond market, because a lot has been since the election, what the district's debt profile is, your ratings, and then what our plan is to exhaust the authorization that we received from the voters back November 2015 for $135.2 million. What we have remaining to sell and issue is $67.95 million. And so this presentation follows a format similarly to what I shared with you about 3 months ago when we were talking about refinancing some bonds, which we ended up doing, and I think the timing was really good because the market has changed a little bit since that time. And so under the table of contents, we have 5 sections, and I'm going to go over to section 1. This is the interest rate update. I put this because I still want to put in perspective, although we've seen an increase since the election occur of about 80 basis points in the bond market, which to us, it's quite a bit. It's 0.8% of a percentage. And so that's pretty drastic, especially over a 4-week period. And so that's reflected on the far right here of this graph. But you can see here overall, we're still in a historically low interest rate environment. So we're not happy that rates have increased, but this is where we're at, and it's still pretty good compared to where we were at before. Section 2 is the district's existing debt and credit profile. These are just some of the factors that bond investors look at when determine whether to invest in these bonds that the district is ready to sell. They look at tax rate history, which is on slide number 6. We've been very fortunate. We've been able to issue bonds for new projects and for infrastructure, but the INS tax rate has been relatively stable compared to what other districts have to go through. And the reason for that is because the growth rate that the district has been experiencing with respect to your property values. So we've been able to manage that pretty well. Currently, our M&O tax rate is $1.04 per $100 valuation, and the INS tax rate is 36 cents per $100 valuation. And what I mentioned earlier is your growth in property taxes. You can see there in 2007, the district's property tax base was $4.93 billion, and currently it's just under $8 billion. If you go to the next slide, this is your average daily attendance. One of the big reasons why we've been building so much in the past 10 years. You can see there that the growth is continuing to occur at pretty good levels. I know this year the growth occurred, but not as much as we anticipated, but the district is in still that growth mode. Next slide is slide number 9. These are the 10 outstanding bond issuances that the district has. I know that sounds a lot, but some of these are refinancings of a big portion of these bonds that are still outstanding. But currently the principal outstanding is just under $313 million. Historically, the district has issued 20 and 25-year bonds, which is relatively shorter than most districts. Most districts, when they're doing large projects like this, are financing those projects over a 30-year period, and so the district's been conservative in that sense and has been saving the taxpayers some interest cost funds. The next page, page 10, this is the debt service illustration. This is just based on your existing debt payments. As you can see there, a window opens up in 2019 where we are paying off some bonds, and then again in 2027. The next page, page 11, these are the district's ratings, and currently all of the district's bond issuances are rated AAA, which is the safest rating available for municipal bonds, except the 2009 issue, which we ended up refinancing a good portion of that, but there's a small portion still outstanding that is not supported by the permanent school fund guarantee that TA offers, and we're just supporting that with our own underlying credit rating. If you go to the next page, page 12, these are the investment grade rating scales. We're currently rated by the 3 major rating agencies, Moody's, Standard & Poor's, and Fitch. And you can see there in the boxes, those are what we call our underlying ratings, or our true credit rating as a district. This is what we had to use in 2009 when we sold those bonds without the credit enhancement by TA. These ratings are fantastic, and they're wonderful, and they're very strong. They're all in the what we call the AA handle. And so because of that, whenever we've issued bonds for the district, they've almost sold themselves. The name is recognizable in the bond market, and they recognize the fact that you all are doing a good job here with respect to your finances, everything that you're able to control in terms of your budgets and expenditures, rating agencies and bond investors alike. And so that's reflected here by 3 independent parties showing that you all have strong credit ratings at the AA handle. We're going on to section 3 now. A few pages down, we're talking about the bond financing team and issuance process. Just wanted to highlight it's not just myself doing a lot of this, a lot of help from the administration, getting us the information to prepare the necessary documents. We have bond counsel Jeff Golbus with McCall, Parkes, and Horton taking care of the legal work for the bond issuances. We have purchasers, the actual investor in the bonds, and obviously the credit rating agencies who give us ratings on ourselves and the bonds. Slide number 15, this is just the role of financial advisor. This is basically to say I guide you through the process, and at the end of the day, my main job is to get you the lowest interest rate possible. The next slide, slide 16, this is the bond issuance process, just basically what I talked about before. Typically for municipal bonds of this size, the main purchasers or the end investors of the bonds are going to be what we call institutional investors. These are insurance companies, mutual funds, to a certain extent banks, and to more limited extent what we call retail investors or individual investors that are wanting to buy for their own portfolio. If you go to the next slide, slide 17, these are the two different sale methods that school districts are allowed to use when issuing their municipal bonds. We have competitive sale method and negotiated sale method. We've used both methods here at the district in the past for the refinancing. We use the negotiated sale method where we pre-select underwriters to work with us and get us that low interest rate to refinance bonds. Historically, the district has chosen a competitive sale method whenever we're issuing what we call new money bonds. These are bonds that we're going to use for projects that we're contemplating. Competitive, we basically just set a bid time and date, and whoever provides us the lowest interest rate at that certain time is the winner of the bonds. And nobody can see those bids coming in until that certain time and date. It's all done electronically, and it's a secure method. We're going on to section 4. This is just briefly talking and giving you an update as to the 2015 bond program with respect to the financing portion. We asked the voters for $135.9 million in bond authorization. Last year we sold half of that authorization, $67.95 million. We chose that because we knew we were not going to spend all those bonds in a 12-month period, and also it helped us stagger the tax rate increase so we wouldn't hit the taxpayers all at once is the reasoning behind that. For this issue, when we first started planning for this bond program in the summer 2015, we were being very conservative because we just don't know what interest rates are going to be. But we're projecting that interest rates would be, on a conservative basis, 4.25% interest rate. Based on current market conditions, I still feel good about that number, and we'd be below that number. We'd probably be in the high 3% interest rate if we would be selling those bonds today. What I can't do, because my crystal ball is pretty cloudy, is I can't say what we're going to get next month when we're actually issuing the bonds. My hope is that the bond market will stabilize a little bit. I think it overextended itself in terms of how quickly it went up in that short period of time. The overall tax impact that we told the voters for this program was anywhere from 6 to 10 cents to cover for this program. Last year's bond issue, when we sold half of that authorization, resulted in an INS tax rate increase of 3.31 cents. For this bond issue, again, this is just an estimate. It's anywhere from 3 to 4 cents is what the impact would be on your INS tax rate for when you're budgeting next year. The big determinant of what your tax rate is going to be as a result of this bond issue is not so much going to be the interest rate that we lock in next month, but really what our certified property values come in at in July. And so in July timeframe, we're in the budgeting mode. At that point, we'll know a little bit for sure what the INS tax rate is going to be as a result of this bond issue. We're going now to the end part of this. We are on slide number 20. These are just the next steps. What the board is considering today is a financing plan and approving what we call a delegated sale bond order or parameter sale order. Basically, you're allowing us and the administration to move forward on all the documents, go into the market, put the bid out for January 18th next month, when we would open the bids, lock in an interest rate, and you're delegating the authority over, it could be the board president, the superintendent, or the CFO to sign the final documents and lock in that rate, as opposed to having us come back to you and schedule our bond sale around your next board meeting. It gives us a little bit more flexibility. Based on that timeline, we intend to deliver those bond proceeds into your construction account on February 16, 2017. That's just done electronically. Page 22, this is just an illustration using that conservative 4.25% interest rate, the annual principal and interest payments for this bond issue over a 25-year period. Conservative projections about $4.5 million in annual principal and interest payments. The last page here, or I think it's the last page, the second to last page, is page 23. This is a term sheet. This is just basically a summary of the bond transaction. The payments are going to be structured just like your existing bonds. semi-annual interest payments and annual principal payments. Again, this is a 25-year bond issue. We're using a very traditional level repayment structure, as I showed you in the previous slide. We are recommending a competitive sale method that's worked for us quite well in the past, and we anticipate it'll work well again before we've been able to attract a number of investors whenever we competitively bid your bonds. The last page, ladies and gentlemen, is just a summary of the delegated authority action item that you'll be taking this evening. In that item, per state law, we have to list, of course, the parameters in which we could issue the bonds. Next month, we can't issue more than 67.95, which is fine because that's all we have in terms of authorization remaining. The maximum interest rate, this is just an arbitrary figure that we plug in. We just put in 5%. Typically, we anticipate, as I said earlier, to be below that. And also that the repayment term can exceed a 25-year period. And again, you'd be delegating authority to sign the final documents to board president, superintendent, or Mr. Martindale. I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
One of the questions I have on slide 23 on the interest dates. So if the sale date is January 18th, this is just a curiosity question. So they get a interest payment on February 15, 2017?
No, so I'm sorry, that should be 2018.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, that's a typo. Yes. I'm not an accountant. So.
Any other questions? Thank you. I guess we'll see you again.
Yes. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. We'll move on to item C4, concern, discussion, possible action related to board policy FFA, local. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Yokin, members of the board, as has been our custom, we're bringing to you policy changes to the board for a discussion item. At the workshop here in December was anticipated action item at a regular meeting in January. This one is policy FFA local. It comes out of our SHAC committee, our school health advisory committee. Mr. Reed does a good job of leading that group. Diane Dom works with them closely as well because a lot of this has to do with child nutrition. And so what we have here is a pretty encompassing policy for, I think this was also sent to you in transmittal, so this would be an opportunity for us to either answer any questions or take questions that you have before our next meeting. You will see two things that are bolded. Basically, they're the same statement. One, highlighted in yellow. One's on page 1, the other's on page 2. And it's under our wellness plan, and it has to do with district standards for food and beverages provided but not sold to students during the day on a school campus. What we're talking about is, let's say somebody comes to your class to do a presentation and brings 24 donuts. Not that that would happen, but so let's say somebody did that. Yeah. So what? So what, the food that's given out, what is our feelings about that? So what the board, Ms. Dom and some of the SHAC committee members kind of just want to get a little feedback from the board is, what kind of vantage point do you guys come from in your role as board members? Do you want to see more of a stringent, harder line as far as what's allowed and what's not allowed in the classroom, or do you maybe fall on more of the flexible side, allowing the teachers and the principals be able to have a little bit more flexibility in what's allowed in the classroom? So she requested a little bit of feedback on that, so we just wanted to throw that out to y'all if you wanted to provide some feedback.
Well, I'm going to say something. Children don't get fat at school, okay? And coming in, to one classroom and having one donut does not make one child unhealthy. I think the only thing that we need to be aware of is anything that they have as far as, I'm sorry. Well, that's true. And they certainly aren't eating the saltless food, as I've been told by several children. I've actually had several, that's probably the number one thing kids probably come up and say to me is, can you do something about the food? Nothing. I can't do anything. Allergies. I mean, that would be my only concern, is that we make certain that any outside source would be aware of those children that have severe allergies or allergies of some sort. And I think that the district already does things and I mean, I've had a child that was severely allergic to peanuts long before we even really kind of knew that. And we were made aware of that, and all the parents were in what we were allowed to bring to that classroom. So other than that, I would hate for us to put more policy on food than there already is.
I agree. I mean, kids are not developing their eating habits at school. And
That was such a nicer way to say that. It was really, was much more politically correct.
But we're going to remember what you said.
But I think that in some of the experiences my children had, the ability to share cultures a lot of times comes from the difference in foods. And you can talk about how it's different, but you would like to allow your children the opportunity to experience some of those differences. And so, to me, limiting the food that comes in may limit the ability to experience things different than the Brazos Valley. And some of the kids are not ever going to leave the Brazos Valley, but they may have had an opportunity to eat food from a different culture or a different part of the world, and I'd hate to limit that.
I'll go next.
You want donuts at every meal? Or? He wants bread. He just, as long as it's bread.
Yeah, let's not make me our standard. I would defer to the judgment of teachers and principals. I think the safety issue is well stated, and clearly I believe that is a primary concern of anything we do. But with that safety concern in mind, I definitely would defer to the school level, and I would defer to the classroom level. Now, with that said, is there a particular problem that's been identified that we're being asked to look at or to solve?
No, this is part of what the School Health Advisory Committee does, is develop local policy. And so they're going through this and working through making these recommendations. And kind of, I think they have find themselves with some cognitive dissonance about some of these particular issues. And so as they weigh these, they want to make sure that the policy that they're helping to develop is falling in line with what our expectations are as a district.
Okay, then with that, I would defer to the school and classroom level decision
Well, and that goes for athletics too, is right? I mean, that's probably what they're, because it says not sold.
Yeah, this is provided to kids, who's given to kids, that we already have things that cover what's sold and particular times of the day and locations in the building. We already have
All of that.
stuff for that. A specific policy for that. This is kind of other things that need to be weighed in on. So.
Flexibility.
I'm allergic to chocolate.
Yeah. Chocolate speaks to me.
Yeah, I think we've got what we need. Okay. All right. I know that everybody needs to give. All right.
Thank you for their work, though.
This
Thank you.
should be an action item next month.
We'll move on to C5, consideration, discussion, and possible action related to setting a date for current and former board member reception. Dr. Ely.
Thank you, Dr. Yoke, and members of the board. While we appreciate our board members every month out of the year, we pause in every January to celebrate Board Appreciation Month, and we've done a number of things to hopefully display our appreciation for you and the work that you do. The administration has thought about doing something slightly different this January. And instead of doing some type of performance or gift during the regular board meeting in January, to really pause and look back and appreciate not only the 7 members who are sitting here today, but many of the board members who came before you and laid the groundwork for what College Station ISD is today. And so we've thrown out the idea of having a reception for current and former board members to celebrate where we are as a school district. And I think it's a good idea. Wanted to kind of get some feedback from the board, and if the board is amenable to that, we've got some dates kind of penciled in on the calendar and to see what might work with everybody.
Comments?
The board regular scheduled board meeting that month of January, is on the 17th. So we would be looking at actually the week after that. We've got Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday tentatively there, so that's the 23rd, 24th, or 26th.
I typically have commitments on Thursday evening.
Preference would be for that Monday. You should be aware that on that Tuesday night is all the basketball games.
Oh, yes, thank you. That is the second Crosstown Showdown. The first one being this Friday. Thank you.
So this we're narrowing it down
Monday's
to the
looking good.
23rd of
I would
January?
like the 23rd. If I had to choose, but
Well, we do.
we do have to choose that. So I would propose the 23rd unless people have an issue.
I like the 23rd.
Have something every other night.
Okay, that would make it difficult. Everybody seems to be good with that. I'm hearing no dissent. Okay, great. Look for
We have a
some more
set
information coming.
time?
We don't have a time yet. Dinner time.
Okay.
Supper time. We have a tentative location. I'm thinking of doing it at College View High School and the downstairs in that open area as you most of you saw last week when we did our tour over there.
Any other comments or concerns? With that, we'll adjourn.